Good afternoon, everyone. This is Ryan on behalf of the marketing team with School Health, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today and participating in our webinar with Karyn Buxman. Karyn is a neurohumorist and a former school nurse, and she's here to speak to us today about how humor can help all of us live a more positive, productive, and a happier life. And I think that that is a message that we could all use right now. Before I turn the time over to Karyn, I would like to review a few quick things about today's webinar. First, we will not be taking audio questions, but you can submit questions through the questions interface in GoToWebinar. You can submit questions anytime during the presentation. Karyn is planning to take a little break during her presentation to talk about some questions that have come in, and then we will continue on. The webinar, of course, will be recorded, as all of School Health's webinars are. We will be posting a link to it on our schoolhealth.com website, and we will email you a link for future playback. We're also going to be including some helpful resources on the follow-up emails that you receive. Among them will be a link to Karyn's book, What is So Funny About School Nursing, which is available for purchase on our schoolhealth.com website. Everyone who attends today's webinar will also be receiving a certificate of attendance for joining us today. You should expect to receive that in your email this afternoon, along with the follow-up materials. And lastly, if you are having any technical difficulties with the audio or the visual portion of today's webinar, please call GoToWebinar directly at 855-352-9003. Again, that number for GoToWebinar is 855-352-9003. And now, Karyn, take it away.
Well, what is so funny about a crisis? So in the chat, for just a second, if you'll just play with me here a bit, I would love it if you would write the name of something, your favorite funny movie or sitcom, in the chat. If you have access to the chat, just very quickly, we're only going to take less than 60 seconds. Write the name of your favorite funny movie or sitcom in the chat. Mine, I love Big Bang Theory. I am a huge fan of Modern Family. I have all sorts of ones that I love. So what are your funny movies, funny sitcoms? Keep them coming. All right, a few more seconds. Take a look at these, because we're going to refer back to these a little bit later, and how you can leverage this, how you can use this. Because while there's nothing funny about a crisis, it can be a laughing matter. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. Karyn Buxman. I have been in nursing for many years, and I started out working in pediatrics. I worked in OB, I did geriatrics, I did med-surg, I worked in a lot of critical care. I did ER, ICU, surgery, home health, hospice, and yes, I was a school nurse. I loved being a school nurse. As a matter of fact, I was so enthusiastic when I showed up at the first meeting for all of the teachers and the administration and everything, and they introduced me. In my enthusiasm, I was so excited that I said, if you need any help, if you want more sex, drugs, communicable diseases, come see me. It came out totally wrong. It came out totally wrong. They had a great laugh at my expense. I can laugh about it now, but I love this. I took care of 2,000 children, grades K through 12, and I knew that I had finally reached my claim to fame one day when I was going through Walmart, throwing things into my shopping cart, and then one of my students was in the aisle and he saw his mom and he tugged her arm and he goes, "Mom, look." It's the lice lady. I don't know how many of you have ever been referred to as the lice lady, but you've made it when. So I went on also to work in mental health. I worked in air ambulance. I went on to teach. And then I became an entrepreneur. And I know what some of you are thinking. She couldn't hold a job. That's not really the case. But while I was doing these things, I also went back to grad school and started studying. Went for my master's, had to do a thesis and research. And this is where I started studying the relationship between humor, health, and communication. And through this, over the last 30 years, I've discovered just how powerful this is. And particularly now, we're in such a time like no other, not just in school nursing, but around the world. And I want to show you how you can work this to your advantage. Another thing that some people don't know about me is that I love zombies. I live in San Diego, California, and one of our claims to fame is something called Comic-Con. Comic-Con is this amazing trade show that attracts over 140,000 people in one place. And they have amazing vendors who have everything from superheroes to fantasy to zombies. And this particular year, they had a zombie display that was bar none, best of any, this huge, almost the size of a block of The Walking Dead. And it was inside this chain link compound. And they actually had zombie characters walking around inside the compound. These weren't just pretend zombies. These were professional zombies, and they walked just like real zombies would walk. And I kept coming back to this over and over again because I was so fascinated. And one afternoon, as they were announcing that the trade show was over for the day, everybody please come to the front doors. Instead, I headed back for one more look at my zombies. And when I got back there, I found that they had opened the fence to the compound and all the zombies were walking out. They never broke character. And as they're coming out, two of them spy me. And they start walking toward me, arms stretched out, growling. Their faces looked like they were just about to slide off. And my prefrontal cortex was mesmerized by this. Oh my gosh, how cool. Whereas my reptilian brain said, whoa, I think these zombies could actually eat you. Let's go. One of them, his arm outstretched, just kept getting closer and closer. And now my prefrontal cortex is analyzing. Look at the makeup. He looks so real. It's just amazing. And then my reptilian brain was going, get out of here now. Get out of here now. And the zombie kept getting closer and closer. And just about the time that the zombie could reach out and touch me, my prefrontal cortex did say, maybe we should be moving on. And again, the amphibian, the reptilian part of my brain is screaming. So I turned to run. And when I turned to run, I see that one of the other zombies had snuck up right behind me. And I screamed like a little girl. My brain was totally hijacked. And right now, so many of us are going through that kind of hijack because of all of the challenges that we're facing, particularly with the pandemic. Our brains get frozen and overtake the part of our brain that helps us think clearly. Many years ago, I was touring the United States with a couple of other colleagues of mine. It was 1998, and we were bringing the concept of laughter for no reason around the country. And as we did 22 cities, the very last city that we went to, was Phoenix, and they took us to 7 different places throughout the day. And the very last place that they took us throughout the day was this daycare center for kids 5 through 8. And it seemed kind of odd that they were taking us to a daycare center to talk about laughter. We were sharing the concept of laughter for no reason. But we go where we're sent, and we walk into this room about, I don't know, 50 children seated on the carpeted floor, and they are so excited to see us. We started introductions, and I said, I'm Karyn Buxman. I've traveled from Hannibal, Missouri. This is my colleague, Steve Wilson, who's traveled from Columbus, Ohio. And here is our colleague, Dr. Madan Kataria, who's traveled all the way from Mumbai, India. And then Steve asked the kids, does anyone here know where India is? And immediately every child raised their arm. They just were waving wildly, excuse me, wildly in the air, going, I know, pick me, pick me, pick me. And there was this one little boy who was so enthusiastic in the front. And so Steve said, okay, son, tell us, where's India? And the little boy put his hands over his face and said, oh no, I forgot. The little boy next to him shoved him and said, I know where India is. And so I said, okay, tell us, where's India? And he said, that's easy. It's right here in Phoenix. I smiled, I shook my head, and I said, I don't think so. And he said, well, it used to be. That is the kind of enthusiasm that we have as children. That's the kind of enthusiasm that you see with students. You're not seeing it as much right now. I hear a lot of reports from people who say that the students are also feeling scared, also feeling confused, also feeling sad. But what if we could get back to that enthusiasm? What if when we get up in the morning, we could say, pick me? That's where I want us to be able to get back to that feeling and back to that level of appreciation. It's a little difficult when you're in the middle of a crisis. And a crisis can occur on many, many different levels. For one, a crisis can occur on a personal level. It affects just you. Maybe it affects your entire family. Maybe it affects your place of work or your organization. Maybe it affects your entire community. It could affect an entire region. It might affect globally, or it could affect nationally. All of these are instances where crisis can occur. But the interesting thing is about a crisis is that your body's response to a crisis is basically the same, whether it's a personal crisis, whether it's a national crisis, whether it's a global crisis. A lot of it has to do with how long you're in crisis and how much emotional attachment you feel to that crisis. And let me share with you real quickly a crisis that occurred from a friend who was a school nurse. She wasn't a school nurse, she was a teacher at one of the schools where I was a school nurse. And she was telling me about this horrendous day that she had. She said that she taught second graders and that one of her students raised his hand and he said, Mrs. Ayers, I'm not feeling very good. I think I'm going to throw up. And at that point, she started yelling, run to the restroom, run to the restroom. You can make it. You can make it. He ran a few steps and then heaved all over the floor. She said, at that point, the little girl next to him took one look and started gagging. She said, Linda, run to the bathroom, you can make it. She said, I was cheering them on. And then she heaved onto the floor. And she said, one by one, the students started seeing and smelling all of the smells and the sights of all of this puke. And they just started vomiting one after another, after another. She said, it took place in less than several minutes. And it was like a scene from The Exorcist. She said, I can laugh about it now. She said, but the janitor and I, she said, it took us hours and hours to clean up the mess. So let's take a look at where you are in terms of dealing with a crisis. I've put together a report card, and this will also be available to you at a link called the Crisis Recovery Toolkit. And it will give you a little bit more of an objective point of view of where you might be right now in dealing with all of the challenges that you're having with students, the challenges that you're having with parents and teachers and shortages and politics and all the things that get involved that make it harder for you to do the job that you love to do and that you're called to do. So in this report card, it says on a daily basis. So rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, and there will be a downloadable PDF for you to use on your own. If you want to take a look at this again or share it with others, I'm happy for you to do so. But on a daily basis, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm feeling optimistic about how this crisis will affect me over the next 6 to 12 months. I'm feeling meaningfully connected to the people who mean the most to me, whether that's your family, your friends, your colleagues. I'm patient and compassionate with the people I interact with. I'm feeling energized and vibrant physically, mentally, and emotionally. Again, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm taking on challenges in stride without feeling stressed, anxious, or depressed. I'm consistently making good decisions and not allowing stress to distract me or cause me to lose focus. And last, I'm having daily experiences that result in laughter and feelings of enjoyment. So if you were to actually put this on a grade card in our traditional grade card scale, if you had somewhere between 63 to 70 points, you would be A. You're dealing with this so well, and you should be helping guide and mentor others with the things that you're doing. If you got 56 to 62, that's still really good given the times that we're in. 49 to 55, you're hanging in there. Under 49, these are signs of struggle, and you really need to be very cognizant about how you are dealing with your stress, because the children, the students depend on you. And if Karen Daly, who is the past president of the American Nurses Association, said that we must care for ourselves before we can care for our patients or our students or others. So it really is important for you to be aware of where you are and then take action on it. Right now, people's brains are on fire. And when this occurs, we find that we're pulling the energy from the thinking part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex. It's being pulled back into that survival part of our brain, just like it did when I was dealing with zombies, because quite frankly, your brain can't tell the difference between a zombie apocalypse and a real apocalypse or a real catastrophe. Every single body system is on fire. It affects us physiologically. Some of you have probably noticed physical symptoms, and I invite you to maybe put in the chat some of the physical symptoms that you're noticing. Is it headaches? Is it tight muscles? Is it feelings of pain, discomfort from the tight muscles? Is it your inability to sleep, inability to eat, or maybe just the opposite is happening? But we feel this very holistically all over our bodies. We also experience it not just physically, but psychologically, because we're more in line to experience anxiety, stress. Many are reporting depression. Some are feeling symptoms of PTSD, and some are even reporting feeling suicidal. And if you are feeling any of these deep, intense feelings, please, please reach out for help. You deserve it, and others are depending on you as well. So please, please take care of yourself. Also, it affects us cognitively. And I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but studies now show that when we are under extreme stress, that we can lose up to 10 IQ points. 10. I don't know about you guys. I don't have that many to spare, but it will make you dumber. How many of you have ever been in a situation where you said something or you did something, and then you thought to yourself, what was I thinking? What was I thinking? Well, the fact was you couldn't think at the moment because your brain had been hijacked. You have to put out the fire first. I had a situation not too long ago. We were under some stress. It was not a negative stress necessarily. Well, it was becoming a negative stress. Even good stress can become negative when it becomes extreme. But we were really needing to find a place to move. And my husband and I went to this one apartment complex, and waiting for a tour, we saw a Hispanic couple get off the elevator, and we thought, oh, well, while we're waiting for the tour, we'll just ask them how they like this place. And so my husband waved at them and walked toward them and said, do you live here? Do you live here? How do you like this place? And the Hispanic woman held up her thumb and forefinger just about a ½ inch apart, indicating that she didn't really understand English. She said, English, and held up her fingers very small. And I didn't want her to feel embarrassed. I wanted her to feel comfortable. And so I just laughed and waved at her, and I said, oh yes, oui, oui. And then I looked at my husband and I said, oui, 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 oui. What am I all of a sudden? French? Where did this come from? But my brain was not functioning at the full cognitive capacity. I was feeling a great deal of stress because of multiple things on my plate. And with that, my brain became dumber. How many of you are looking for means of coping that maybe aren't healthy coping mechanisms? Humor restores the human touch, the caring to the highly technical, potentially dehumanizing world of healthcare. And humor can help us when our brains do get hijacked. This is a slide of maybe an unhealthy coping mechanism instead of a healthy coping mechanism like humor. But I did come across a piece the other day that was the top 10 rules for stress eating. So if this is one of your coping mechanisms, maybe you want to keep these in mind. Rule number 10, this is the Letterman's top 10 list. Any food eaten in a moving vehicle doesn't count. Good news, calories aren't mobile. 9, things licked off knives and spoons have no calories if you are in the process of preparing something. Examples are peanut butter on a knife while making a sandwich, or ice cream on a spoon while making a sundae. 8, if you fatten up the people around you, then you look thinner. 7, when you eat with someone else, calories don't count as long as you don't eat more than they do. 6, foods used for medicinal purposes never count, such as hot chocolate, brandy, and chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream. 5, theater-related foods do not have additional calories because they are part of the entire entertainment package and are not part of one's personal intake. Examples include hot buttered popcorn, Twizzlers, Kit Kats, Skittles, and of course, Milk Duds. Number 4, cookie pieces contain no calories. Broken cookies result in calorie leakage. 3, eating food off someone else's plate does not count. The calorie count remains with the original owner. 2, if you drink a diet soda with a large order of French fries, the calories in the fries are canceled out by the diet soda. And last but not least, number 1, if you eat something and no one sees you eat it, it contains no calories. So feel free to follow me for further nutritional advice. So why humor? Why humor? Let's look at through the lens of humor. One of my favorite definitions of humor came from a gentleman, Joel Goodman, who said that humor is a childlike perspective in an otherwise serious adult reality. A childlike perspective in an otherwise serious adult reality. We all used to have that perspective, seeing things from a sense of joy, seeing things from a sense of happiness. And we lose that perspective over time. One mother was telling me about her daughter who was a 3rd grader, and she brought home a math homework sheet. And she noticed that on the homework sheet, one of the math problems was circled in red ink. So she looked a little closer, and the math problem went like this. There's 32 students in the classroom. 17 of them are boys. How many of them are girls? Her daughter's answer was, the rest of them. Okay, not a wrong answer. It's an answer that comes from joy, it comes from creativity. And we tend to lose that as we grow up. It reminds me of a time when my youngest son was a 1st grader and it was time for him to go to school. I realized he hasn't been through the kitchen yet for breakfast and it's time to catch the bus. And so I yell to his room, no answer. I yell again, no answer. So now I rush over to his room, and just as I start to push open the door, I hear this thumping noise. And it sounds like there's some kind of singing going on. And so I push open the door and I see my 1st grader jumping up and down on his bed. However, in his instance, he was swinging his school clothes over his head. He was kicking and dancing and laughing, and I lost it. I said to him, "What do you think you're doing?" He stopped jumping. He gave me this big smile and he said, "Mom, don't you think getting dressed in the morning ought to be more fun?" Unfortunately, I said, "No," because I was in an adult perspective rather than a childlike perspective. But if we could get back to that childlike perspective in a serious adult reality, this is where you maybe perhaps can see this more easily than some others in the profession. So let's take a look at what happens when you have a happy brain. What happens when you are feeling joyful, when you're feeling positive, when you're seeing the humor in the situation? All of the negative things that we see in an amygdala hijack, all the things that we see when we become stressed are the antithesis. When we're stressed, we see our muscle tension go up. When we are experiencing a humorous brain, humor on the brain, a happy brain, the muscle tension is released. I want you to think back to a time where you had a really, really good laugh. And how many of you have ever laughed so hard that you had to just lean over and hang on to a desk or hang on to a chair? That's because your stomach muscles tensed up, but then they relaxed. And this is happening all over your body. My favorite evaluation came once from a woman who attended one of my presentations, and she said, "You made me laugh so hard, tears ran down my leg." That is muscle relaxation, maybe to the extreme. But we see this, we also see that while we're in a state of stress, our immune system gets kicked out from underneath us, and we're more likely to get sick, which is not a good thing during a pandemic. But on the flip side, we see that our immune systems actually get bolstered. And much of the research that I've seen actually looks at immunoglobulin A. And for those of you who haven't dusted out your books in a while, immunoglobulin A is actually a very positive factor in respiratory diseases. And so while there is no science on the effects of laughter and the immunoglobulin A on COVID, right now, what could it hurt? I think we need all sorts of tools in our arsenal. So we want to laugh, we want that muscle relaxation, we want an increase in our immune response, and we also find that it allows us to recapture the cognitive capacity that we lost. And this is really important because your cognitive capacity is what allows you to problem solve. It's what allows you to be creative. And when you're dealing with situations with parents, when you're dealing with children who are sick, or you're dealing with children who have lost maybe a family member, or teachers who are coming to you because they're all stressed out, you need to have as much cognitive capacity as you possibly can. Now, many people will say, but you don't understand, there's nothing funny happening in my life. And if that is your mindset, then that is your reality. To get these holistic benefits, you need to be able to see things from that humorous perspective. Humor from children, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times comes from joy and delight. As a matter of fact, the majority of time, it comes from joy and delight. But by the time we get to be adults, a lot of our humor comes from pain and discomfort. It might be ours, it might be somebody else's. I want you to think back to a time where you experienced something that was painful, it was embarrassing. You thought maybe you were never going to live it down, but a week later you were sharing it with somebody and you were laughing about it. Maybe you found yourself saying, someday we'll laugh about this. And I would ask, is there any way that you could shorten that time frame? If you allow yourself to play with your pain and see this from a childlike perspective, you can shorten that distance and you can find the humor in the pain later. Lord knows there's more than enough pain right now, but not everything is going to be funny because we have to be able to experience the emotional distance. And so if you're not finding things funny, don't worry. I've got some additional information and techniques from you. But I remember a time, an experience that I didn't find very funny at the time, but I had taken my two young boys to a movie. They were about 5 and 8, and it was a movie about a dog. And it looked like at the end of the movie, like the dog was going to die. This was a crowded matinee theater. We're sitting in the middle of the theater. Everybody is holding the arms of their seats. They're tense. Nobody's making a sound. You could have heard a pin drop on the icky, sticky floor. When out of the silence, my 5-year-old bolts up out of his chair and announces to the entire theater, "I've got an M&M stuck up my nose." People started to turn around. I started to feel panic. So I did the first thing any mother would do. I reached over with my pinky and I tried to snag it. And at that point, we both realized it was so far up his nose, it was about to fall into his brain. He's becoming more panicked. I'm becoming more panicked. And so I put my hand in front of his face and I said, "Okay, Adam, blow into mommy's hand." He took a deep breath and blew. Nothing happened. More people are turning around. He's starting to cry louder. It's still stuck. I didn't have a plan B. So I turned to him and I said, "Blow harder." And he blows again and he says, it's still stuck. Now nobody in the theater cares if the dog is going to die. Everybody's turning toward us. And I'm having flashbacks to the time that I used to work in the ER, and parents would bring in their children and they would say, you know, I don't know how my daughter got this M&M stuck up her nose, or this Lego or this Barbie doll head. You know, I only turned my back for a minute. And I would be very compassionate and say, oh, yes, of course I understand. But then I would turn to the other nurse and say, call family services. So I'm feeling very frustrated and very panicked as well. And so finally I said to my son, all right, mommy's going to hold her finger on the other side of your nose, and I want you to blow as hard as you can. So he blew as hard as he could, and boom, about 317 miles an hour, a green M&M comes flying out of his nose and impales it into the palm of my hand. And while I'm sitting there trying to think about how to get rid of this toxic mess in my hand, I feel something brush my palm, and I turn to see him with an empty hand, and he looks at me and says, it's mine. So humor can come from pain given enough emotional distance. Maybe you remember, maybe you don't, Maslow's hierarchy. But what we see here during the COVID crisis is that many of us, and those that we're working with and those whom we're caring for, they're back down at the bottom two levels of physiological and safety. They are needing they need safety. They need the basic needs. And for teaching and well-being to occur, we need them to be at a higher level. We need you to be at a higher level. But many times moving from the bottom of this pyramid to the top of the pyramid is too big of a leap. And so even allowing yourself just to take incremental steps up, work your way up, to be able to get yourself to the destination you want to go. Because sometimes it looks like it's so far away that you don't even want to try. There are some ways that humor can help. And I want to go over these with you so that you can implement these, again, so you can do the work that you were called to do. So I want to talk about how humor can help you distract, reframe, relate, and refuel. First of all, the ability to distract, to give your brain just a little break. Because when you are in a crisis, if there's nothing that you can do about it, if you are powerless to change the situation, then humor can give you that micro break, that brain break. Viktor Frankl once said, it is well known that humor, more than anything else in the human makeup, can afford an aloofness, an ability to rise above any situation, even if only for a few seconds. Viktor Frankl was a prisoner of war during World War II. He was a prisoner in the Holocaust, and yet he was able to find humor for moments in the darkness. And if Viktor Frankl could find those moments of humor in his extreme conditions, if we're intentional, we can also find those. To look for humor, to give yourself micro breaks, even if it's just with something like a silly meme, like a cat meme, when your replacement head finally arrives in the mail. You can call upon internal moments of mirth. If you are thinking about something internally, even though it may be a memory, your body responds as if it was in the moment. Very much like we can have an anticipatory effect with stress, we can also have an anticipatory moment with humor. And so just thinking about humor puts us in the right place. Thinking about stories that make you smile, thinking about stories that make you laugh. These are pictures of My grandson, anything around him makes me laugh. Stories of when I was a school nurse make me laugh. I remember a time when I was called to a fourth grade classroom, and as I'm going around the classroom with my little tools, my sticks to check heads, I get to this one little boy's head, and he has a crew cut, so it was really pretty easy. But at the moment I put my sticks to his hair, something leaped out and jumped onto his desk where he whacked it with his hand. My mind is racing because now all I can think is, oh my gosh, I was taught lice can't jump, lice can't fly. I just saw this jump from his head and onto his desk. But then he picked it up and smiled and held it up in front of my face and he said, look, a flea. I don't know if that was the good news or the bad news, but start collecting these funny internal moments that you can use to distract yourself when you are in need. There's also external distractions that you can use. I love sitcoms if you have that much time. And in the beginning, we had a lot of different ones that people placed in the chat. You might even want to go back and save the chat to see what kinds of maybe resources people have suggested that you aren't aware of. Modern Family, Seinfeld, Scrubs, Friends, Big Bang Theory. The nice thing about these is there's no drama, there's no trauma, there's no political agenda. It's just humor. I also have up here on the slide a radio show that I absolutely love. It's called Cabin Pressure, and it's 27 episodes that are just hilarious. They're about 25 minutes long, so it's really nice for commute or exercise. And Benedict Cumberbatch is one of the characters. So if you're like me and a big Benedict Cumberbatch fan, this is something that you may want to check out. But if you don't like the first episode, you don't need to listen to the rest because they nailed it right there. But find something externally. Manipulate your environment. Keep some things on your phone, whether that's funny memes, social media, anything that will help distract you from the moment. So take a minute and write down your humor distractions so that when you are in need, because when you're most in need of humor is when you are least going to be able to think of it. Again, think amygdala hijack. So if you have a list somewhere and you've made a commitment to it, then you are able to leverage this to your advantage. A second one is reframe. And reframing takes a little bit more brain energy because what it's doing is it's trying to help you see things from a different perspective. And being able to do that is very, very helpful because many times we get so focused on the negative that that's all we can think of. Our brains are designed to protect us. And so our brains are constantly just scanning for threat. And the other piece that works to our disadvantage is that what we give attention to, our brain shows us more of. It's not that there's more of it, but it just captures our attention more. So if you are doom scrolling to fill your day, it's only going to show you more doom. But if you reframe and you look to see things from a different perspective, an optimist is someone who figures out that taking a step backward after taking a step forward isn't a disaster, it's a cha-cha. That's an example of reframing. This slide was a funny slide that we showed during a flood when I lived in Missouri. It was reframing. We were trying to see the humor in the situation because when you can laugh at a situation, you can empower yourself. Those of you who have ever been involved in hurricanes, you maybe have seen some of the hurricane humor. This was one in particular that helped reframe and show things from a different perspective. This was one that I stumbled upon just recently. Any of you who are up in the Wisconsin area, there is a delightful little place. It's a restaurant near Milwaukee. And so I would ask you, what do martial arts, Corona beer, and the coronavirus have in common? And that would be this particular restaurant. It's a Greek restaurant called Omicron. It's a family restaurant. They named it Omicron 30 years ago because it's a letter of the Greek alphabet. He said it's easy to pronounce, but now Omicron is being associated with something horrible. But he used what I call humor aikido. Rather than be knocked over by something negative and trying to push back, you use that negative energy to your advantage. That's what the martial arts of Aikido does. Humor Aikido, same thing. You use the negative energy to your advantage. And now this Greek restaurant has taken to putting up signs. They've started selling Corona beer, which they never did before, and had t-shirts made that said, "I got Corona at Omicron Family Restaurant." Great example of reframing. And here, of course, we're reframing the 4 stages of quarantine. Again, when you can laugh at it, it loses its power over you. Relate. The nice thing about humor is that it does help bond people. It helps connect people. And when you share laughter, strengthens those relationships, your brain produces oxytocin, also known as the cuddle hormone. Surrounding yourself with people who get you. These are my peeps, and they're not just goofy people. These are psychologists, they're teachers, they're professors, they're doctors, they're scientists, but they all get me because they all have a great sense of humor. You have people who get you too, who share the kinds of stories and who relate to your stories. For instance, a school nurse told me about a little girl who came into her office. She's a 3rd grader, sometimes what we call frequent flyers. She comes a lot. And she came into the nurse's office, put her hand dramatically to her head. And the nurse said, "Amber, what's wrong?" And she said, "Oh, I'm hot and then I'm cold. I'm happy and then I'm sad. I'm I'm fine, but then I'm tired." She goes, I'm sick." And she goes, "What do you think is wrong?" And the little girl looked at her with these big sad eyes and she said, "I'm pretty sure it's menopause." School nurses know you don't have to make this stuff up. One of the school secretaries, when I was a school nurse at the high school, told me about one of the football players who came in, and he said, "I need to use the phone to call my mom." And she said, "Mark, what's wrong?" And he said, "Well, my mom said, Mark, whatever you do, don't come home without your Letterman's jacket. I can't find it, and I want to know where she wants me to go." Truly, you don't have to make this stuff up, and you know that if you're a nurse. Some people might not get you, but your colleagues will. And so reach out to this community for support. Last, refuel. We thought that we were maybe headed for a sprint when the virus first hit. And then we realized we were in for a marathon. And now what we've come to realize is that it's really more of an Ironman. And it's really taking everything that you've got to be able to deal with the pandemic and with your students and to take care of yourself. It's like pulling from your account. It's like overspending on your credit card. You just keep charging, charging, charging. And finally, the bank is going to slap your wrist and say, "Stop doing that." And you keep doing it, then they're going to take your card away. If you keep drawing, drawing, drawing from your energy reserves, your cognitive reserves, your physical reserves, your body's going to give you warnings, but eventually you may get really sick or entirely shut down. Humor is a habit, not a talent. And so if you start doing this on a regular basis, intentionally and consistently, I guarantee you are going to see a difference. Instead of doom scrolling, look for positive resources. One that you can find on YouTube is some good news. This is on a regular basis. An email that comes out from Maria Shriver, the Sunday paper. There are things out there that put out good news, that put out positive news. To find people that you can laugh with, to find people who will support you through those dark times and who really will be there for you and enjoy your sense of humor, laugh at your jokes, even if you're funny or not funny. Have an accountability partner. My friend Heidi and I, we text something funny to one another every day. Actually, I'm the one who sends most of them. I gave her my word that I would do that for her. But here's what I found. Not only did it benefit her, but it also benefited me because it started my day every day looking for something humorous. And over time, that very much changed my mindset. I have additional free resources if you're interested. There's stressrecoverytoolkit.com. I put funny videos there that I enjoy. The report card is there. There's other kinds of resources there. And again, there's no charge for any of this. And if you have suggestions for things you'd like to see put in the toolkit, it's ever evolving. Also, School Health has my book, What's So Funny About School Nursing, in their catalog. And so be sure to look for that. A lot of these stories and other stories are in the book, and also some additional information that I think you will find helpful. Last, I'm going to close with one particular story about a little girl who was in my childhood. She was my best friend, Jill. And it was winter, and we were about 5 years old. It was the end of the day at kindergarten. And Mrs. Seeley, our teacher, instructed us all to put on our coats and gloves and boots and get ready to go home. And then she turned around and she saw my friend Jill sitting on the red bench, her big doe eyes, looking up at the teacher. And the teacher said, "Jill, what's wrong?" And she said, "I can't get these boots on." And Mrs. Seeley kneeled on the floor and started shoving the boots onto Jill's feet. And she shoved and shoved and shoved the first one. It just hardly would go on. She's working up a sweat. And finally she gets it on. She goes to the second boot and she pushes and pushes and pushes. And she can't get, finally it slips on. And she stands up, takes a breath, and she goes, "Wow, Jill, your boots barely fit you." Jill looked up at her and simply said, "They're not my boots." Mrs. Seeley looked flabbergasted, but she dropped back down to her knees and she pulled and pulled and pulled the first boot. It finally popped off. She pulled and pulled and pulled the second boot. It finally popped off. She holds up the boots and says to the classroom, "Class, whose boots are these?" Jill looked up at her and said, "They're my brother's." I thought Mrs. Seeley was going to cry. She got back down on the floor and she shoved and shoved and shoved the first boot. Finally got it on. She's sweating now and her face is red, but she shoves and shoves and shoves the second boot and finally gets it on. She sits on the floor, takes a big breath, and she said, "Jill, where's your mittens?" Jill simply said, "They're in the boots." Look for the humor, distract, reframe, relate, refuel. And a big thank you to School Health for making this possible. I'm a resource for you always. Go out and do the work that you were called to do. Stay safe and see funny.